I think the evolution of all the recent changes with machine learning, first on Performance Max and then on Advantage Plus Shopping, is really let the algorithm and the systems do the heavy lifting of audience details
Mm.
and use the bandwidth of the team to come up with the best creative and ad copy to build it.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of What's Working in E-commerce. I'm your trusty host, Eagan Heath. I have a new agency now. We're called Asymmetric Marketing. You can check us out at asymmetric.pro. Today, I'm speaking with a fellow agency owner. We have Nikki Lindgren. Nikki is from pennock.co. You can check her out and the work that her team is doing. And they work with, tell us, Nikki, the beauty brands and people in that space. Do I have that correct?
You do, and thank you so much for having me today,
Mhm.
Egan. Yeah, we've been around for about 4 years, and we've niched down to really help focus brands in beauty, particularly skincare brands. We still do lifestyle fashion brands.
Okay, very cool. Well, it's great to hear of somebody who's really found success with niching. I'm curious if you could say a little bit about that too, of how did you come to serve that niche and how have you found it just maybe saying no to other people or really focusing on
Yeah.
particular industries?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really drug my feet on that. I did not want to niche because early days of agency life, right? You're just trying to grow the business. And so I was trying to grow at all costs for all of 2020. And it became really apparent that our best success cases, as well as the interest of the team, were greatest served with beauty brands. And so we kind of stumbled upon it. And to me, it's really important that my team enjoys what they're doing since they're the day to day managers and executors of the work. And it's the niche we collectively chose here at Penn.
Yeah, that's great. As you and I were chatting beforehand, I think you mentioned the D2C Index and you're kind of checking your agency's performance against other agencies. And you've even got some case studies we could maybe talk through here. Can you talk a little bit about that? We've had someone come on before who talked about the D2C Index, but maybe remind people what that is and maybe just talk about how you're using that to see how you guys are stacking up.
Yeah, so we as an agency subscribe to the DTC Index, which is put out by Common Thread Collective, which is another
Sure.
agency. And what they're doing is aggregating all of the data that they have access to in their agency world of different verticals, industries, and then just e-commerce in general to look at how different stack ups that can be everything from CPM to spend levels to MER and CAC. And what my team does is we review it every week to see how we compared from our main KPI perspective, which is return on ad spend or CAC, compared to the DTC index. And so that's just something we want to keep a pulse on so we feel good or know that we have some work to do when we're trailing behind it. And then also it's just something our brands like to hear about and how they stack up compared to a bigger set of industry players.
Yeah, seems like a great way to benchmark and just make sure you're in the right area there. I know you're not necessarily pulling the levers these days, but you've come up through all kinds of digital marketing. You've been there, you've done that. And now you've got a team implementing. How would you talk about how to drive performance, whether someone was an in-house marketer to D2C brand or someone's an agency or a freelancer? How do you approach it to make sure you're driving results like that?
Yeah, it has to be really holistic. So I'm usually starting with the finance team and executive leadership to figure out what the ultimate goals are for the coming year and then make sure that we have a budget plan that helps us facilitate that. So we're doing a decent level of analysis of what the spend level should look like and also what we expect from new versus returning customers to see if we can even meet the financial projections for the following year. So that's kind of like the first pass at what we do. Then, as we get into the details month by month, how much are we spending each month on what channels? That's where we're really going to come up with that mix to drive growth. We're in favor of awareness marketing, still against the return on ad spend objective, but like that top net new customer funnel more so than remarketing. So it's really important for us as an agency. We rarely go above 30% mixed against remarketing audiences, just so that we're proving their longevity, scale, growth in what we do. But that's in a nutshell how we first approach attacking what the goals are in front of us.
Okay, pretty interesting. There's a lot to dig in there and a lot of intelligence contained in what you said there. I'm curious on those pieces. When you guys get started, how do you vet and how do you know whether the goals are realistic?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's going to be some obvious things, right? Like if the budget hasn't changed, but the expectation is ROAS is up 25%, we'd maybe kind of scratch our head to assess like, are there new channels? Are there new ways in which we can use existing channels to get there? But if we're talking with leadership and a finance team that just kind of doesn't really understand the ins and outs of how to grow a business, we will raise our hand collectively with them to get them more knowledge so that they can understand when plans are not set up well. Luckily, we work mainly with brands that as long as their MER is getting met and their ROAS expectations are roughly in line with expectations, we'll continue to fund marketing efforts. So it's usually a situation where we're 7 days into the month and we're like, gosh, if we had 20% more daily spend, we'd be this going. Do you want to do that? Yes or no? And so there's some agility in the work we do there too. But the first task is seeing it budget and market trends are going to fulfill the needs of the top line growth.
Is there a certain daily budget, monthly budget? Is there somewhere where it's really a cutoff of we don't touch anything below this, or it's not realistic to expect growth below this? I'm curious if you think of it that way. It kind of sounds like we need to be spending a certain amount and seeing even a certain amount of sales and conversions to have anything to work with.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I mean, there's some old sayings in the industry, and I think like 30% of revenue should be put back into paid budgets minimum. We're usually working with early stage brands that don't have the biggest budget. So we'll take on brands that are spending 15K a month and maybe run two ad platforms for them. It doesn't really make sense to diversify them much beyond that. But ultimately, like the growth and the real opportunity is above 4K. And so that's really our sweet spot in terms of a new brand coming to us is they've outgrown a smaller consultancy or they've outgrown their freelancer just because they don't see any future of a change in terms of the truth of those partners.
Pretty interesting KPI in there, if I understood you right. Are you saying 30% of revenue gets plowed back in for advertising?
Yeah. Yeah. That's usually
Yeah.
kind of back of the envelope, a place we start. We work with startups too that don't have that much history or we'll take them through launch. So coming up with those projections is something we do with our early stage engineers.
Interesting. I know sometimes in a more mature business, 5, 10, 15% of revenue goes back into marketing, but it sounds like if we're working with growth companies, that's the idea of it's all getting plowed back in and growing the business. Are these clients, are they venture backed or they're often bootstrapped?
Yeah, it's a combination. I would say they have a level of funding. I'm not even that privy to like what stage they're at in their funding. There's some consolidation and acquisition. So our clients kind of like trajectory kind of varies brand by brand.
And in terms of the numbers, is there a certain average order value, did you say, and certain margins that need to be there for it to even make sense to advertise on, let's say, paid social right now?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've become a lot more involved in a startup CPG community, and there's a lot of beauty brands that are launching like $7 serums. Maybe that's like a stretch, $7 cleansers and stuff like that. And like there is a point at which if your AOV isn't above a certain dollar amount, let's just call it like $30, it does become a little bit more challenging, at least we're measuring ROAS. There are corner cases though, because if you can break even on that first order and there's a replan play or there's a high LTV play, it can still make sense and be justified. But as much as I'd love to be a great saleswoman, like the reality is we're trying to be realistic with our brand and not just try to get the new business if we don't believe that we do a good job for them. So generally speaking, those lower price point items are brands that we would struggle more in terms of them long-term success.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wonder also how much does the creative matter? Does it need to be really high quality photography, videos? What do you see and what do you vet for when you say, hey, we've got something to work with here. We can run this creative in ads. Do you guys work with clients on the creative? I'm curious how you guys think about that piece.
Yeah, creative is something that's become really front and center for everything that we do. And we were just doing some analysis planning for on-site meetings with clients. And I would say some of our brands are a little bit more legacy brands. They've been around for a while. They're maybe not household well known, but they're still a little old school in their thinking related to creative. So they'll still buy us with more static assets and more carousel type assets and fewer videos. That being said, we know how the algorithms work. And so even though only 30% of the assets we got last year were video. 80% of the spend was utilized against the video creative. And so a real push is really video first for everything we're doing, vertical first for everything we're doing, and working with creator-led content. As long as that continues to be a trend and work, we want to ride that wave. We know it's starting to diminish in terms of returns there, but we want to squeeze as much juice out of that.
Yeah, very cool. Anything else to say about that, of how you do that or what involvement you guys have? Are you finding those creators, or is that something the brands do themselves?
Yeah, we're stacking up a new service offering related to creative. It's interesting how brand agencies evolve and flow. So at the early days, we thought we'd do creative. It ended up to be a huge time suck and cost thing for us. And
Mhm.
we stopped doing it because our brands all wanted to control it. And now, 4 years later, our brands are like, actually, we're running out of bandwidth to do it in house. So we're starting to roll up some services on our end to fulfill creative needs for ads specifically.
Okay. Anything else? I know, again, you're not necessarily in the ad accounts these days, but what does your team say of levers they're pulling? Is it targeting? Is it copy? Is it those creatives? Kind of what does it take to be at the top of that D2C index in terms of performance?
Yeah. So I think the evolution of all the recent changes with machine learning, first on Performance Max and then on Advantage Plus Shopping, is really let the algorithm and the systems do the heavy lifting of audience details
Mm.
and use the bandwidth of the team and the people and the woman power on our end to come up with the best creative and ad copy to build it. So I think like 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, if we were to talk, we would say be super granular and detailed in your targeting. Now the flip is be super granular and detailed in the ad speaking to that target and let the machine learning actually hit that target. Yeah.
Yeah. And is there, since you guys have niched too, and beauty and lifestyle, is there particular messaging? Are there implications? I'm curious how that piece works. Of oftentimes, for our clients, sometimes we do some lead gen as well, and it's really speaking to the pain. What happens if you don't hire for this service, or even if it is a product? We're really kind of leaning into that old school direct response copywriting. I wonder, is it more subtle in beauty and lifestyle? Is it more about the image or the video, or kind of wanting to be that person or wanting to be like that person or imagining your future self? I'm wondering if you can comment on how is this industry different and how do you really need to frame the marketing?
Yeah, I think there's probably 15 ad creative hooks we go back to time and time again, and I'll rattle off some of the top ones. So, us versus them seems to be a big trend. The list of ingredients, the benefits of the ingredients, third party credibility, whether that's testimonial or press quotes before and after. So, those are kind of like the biggest ones we see in the industry. That being said, like we have so many prospects come to us and they kind of want to rip off the playbook of their bigger, established brand that they aspire to be like one day. And I think it really comes down to like having that brand really well defined and the parameters of what the brand would talk about and not talk about. Us versus them is a really tricky topic for a lot of brands to do because it just feels like you're wrong someone else like us, right? In a hopefully factual way. But so I think like we can't just rip off the big brand and assume we're going to do it better than them. So I think it's really going back to the ethos of the brand we're working with, making sure it all kind of holds under their umbrella.
That's great. Can you give us an example of us versus them? You don't have to name brand names if that's not appropriate, but I'm wondering, is that with respect to our brand versus another brand, or is it like our tribe versus another tribe? I'm curious. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what is us versus them and how do you use it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I see it less played out from a tribe perspective and more of like this particular product, if it's a retinol cream versus either general retinol creams on labeled brand next to it,
Mhm.
or they really list out how their percentage of retinol or something is better than a competitor. So there's some legality in there, like you can't say stuff about another brand that is factual. So, we're not the right team to kind of vet you on all of the ins and outs of what to do there. But most of the brands we work with are interested in doing it of themselves against like the standard in the industry. Yeah.
And is it side by side, almost a table, and we've got green check marks versus red X's? Does that work
Exactly.
well? And that might be the visual creative in the paid social ad. Is that right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. I want to ask you something about kind of a different channel, Nick, if that's okay. I think beforehand when we were chatting, you mentioned programmatic. Can you
Yeah.
kind of highlight where are we at with that? You and I are speaking here at the beginning of 2024. Been a long journey here in internet marketing, but once upon a time, it was all about the banner ads. So maybe highlight for people who don't know or aren't using it, what is programmatic? And then Can you talk about how you guys approach it?
Yeah, for us, we've been running programmatic ads. I'd say like 30% of our overall spend for clients in 2023 was against programmatic. And we work with a DSP called Stack Adapt, which has been a really strong partner of ours for a handful of years. And so everything we run is through their platform. And the placements we're usually out on are true display. So we go in and we're going to input more parameters about the audience. So this is a place that has a little bit more of the old school setup. We can get really granular and detailed still about the target. And that's one of the reasons by which our clients like this channel. And so once we're inputting all of the target information, we then get to decide where if we have any exclusions, like maybe religious or political sites, we don't want to be on, what have you. But you can run then any of your GIFs, any of your video assets or static assets there. Programmatic is also a lane into native ad placement. So you can use the same placements to show up on articles about topics that matter to your product or audience. Programmatic vendors usually have connected TV and over the top placement available too. Because we're in a DTC space, most of our brands are really interested in things that are going to drive sales today, not awareness or sales tomorrow. So we really focused on display.
Yeah. And you're tracking performance and doing the sort of usual direct response attribution and right off these ads that people might see on a website or an app.
Exactly. Yeah. So if I'm my target audience, I'll be shown this ad whether or not I'm on Women's Wear Daily or watching a UFC fight, right? So as long as I am the target audience, wherever I see the ad. And, some people would say, why don't you just use Google Display? And one could start there as a test. We've always seen better results using a true programmatic DSP than we have the Google Display Network. So we generally go for a bigger player.
Okay. But you guys are seeing click to buy or click to purchase or add to cart right off of these ads.
Yep. 100%. Yeah,
Interesting.
it's usually pretty neck and neck, honestly, with Meta ad performance for
Wow.
us.
So I don't, you were talking ROAS earlier, but multiple ROAS. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the good thing about the self-serve side of a lot of these DSPs is they don't have a minimum buy-in. They have a minimum buy-in if you need them to manage the ad buy for you. But if you're just going to like go test it out, you can spend 10, $50 a day.
You had my ears perk up about this versus Google Display. We do run Google Display for clients, sometimes even Microsoft actually. But you've got me curious about this piece of maybe check this out. Why do you think the performance is different? Do you think it's the targeting? Do you think there's fewer spam or bots, or what do you make of the difference?
Yeah, I mean, Google is pretty ubiquitous, but I think there's a lot more, placement available in places in which you can market when you're going with a DSP. So I think that that's a big component of it. It could be just like a user friendly angle too, but like I personally find that using that platform and inputting specifics should be a lot easier as a practitioner of running the campaigns on programmatic. So that could be it. And then really kind of working with that mix against remarketing and top of funnel. So I would say we do exceed our 30% like usual minimum for remarketing on programmatic. So we might be split a little bit more like 40% remarketing, 60% awareness. And that also is obviously a huge player in better results.
I appreciate you talking about that. It sounds like, if I'm understanding that right, 70-ish% of the ad spend across channels, across different ad platforms is top of funnel, new people in the funnel, and then 30% is remarketing. Do I have that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's what we aim for. The systems are making it a little messier, right? Like Advantage Plus Shopping, you can put some parameters in there, but it's a little gray. I truly think the direction we'll be going into is acquisition marketing, and it's all one bucket of people. They're either coming
Mhm.
and buying or they're not. But as best we can, still we are trying to diversify top and bottom.
And you guys doing Google as well, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was going to ask how Performance Max influences this. It seems like that's all largely one bucket as well. Am I thinking of that the wrong way, or is that what you guys are seeing?
Yeah, Performance Max is a huge player for us in the beauty space. Just, visually, that's how people want to come across the brand. So that's a little gray too in terms of how much of it is people already familiar with the brand or not. And I think that's a whole conversation in itself on how that type of ad structure has evolved since its launch.
Yeah. Thanks for talking about this. We'll definitely have to check out one of these DSPs, maybe even Stack a Dev. So I appreciate you talking about that. On your website, so this is for people at home, this is panac.co, excuse me. And then you guys have some case studies here. Are there any that you want to talk through or call out? I can pull up and share a screen too if people want to see them.
Yeah, sure. I think they're pretty well written in terms of just having the details there. Let me think of one that would be good to speak to. So this is an example. They're a very trendy fragrance-based brand. They're expanding categories and doing a lot of really cool things as a brand. And they've already had buy-in from big retailers. So like lots of good traction as a brand before we even came on. But I think one of the things that I can speak to is we really tested some different approaches for TikTok for them. So historically, they were targeting their old agency, let's say, was targeting really specific to fragrance audience, which, at face value makes a ton of sense. That's what we're selling here, right? But what my team started to dig into are more of the attributes related to the person who uses Deadpool and is a Deadpool fan. And what we found were people going to festivals and music lovers, and a lot of these complementary areas of lifestyle resonated a lot more with what we were doing. And so we ended up targeting these types of audiences more granularly than they had tested before. And we saw a lot of success quite quickly there. The business has just, really been able to spend and invest a lot more heavily in TikTok as a symptom of kind of these unlocks. And so what we aim to do every month for all our clients is put about 15% of whatever their monthly budget is into a test. And this is an example of a test proving to work really well and us being able to continue to scale that part.
Looks like I see on their website here, TikTok style creative. Anything you can share that your team has noticed in terms of what works on TikTok, either organic or paid?
Yeah, so TikTok is, anything super platform endemic is going to work there. So creator-led content is king. I would say the next thing that we're seeing a huge lift in is being able to point at TikTok Shop. So for both Meta and TikTok, the significant upside in ROAS and reduction of CAC when people can shop directly on the platform. So I think that would be the big win, but you have to look at those leading indicators before you look at CAC and ROAS. Like, are you getting the engagement you want? Are you getting the click you want? Whatever is going to come before the conversion. And if that's already outside of your average in terms of norms, it's not right. So we are really quick. I'd say we launched campaigns within 4 days. 70% of what we've launched is already caught. It's not a winner.
Wow, amazing. Do you find clients are shifting from Meta to TikTok? Is the performance that much better where it makes sense, or we still kind of got a mix across the different platforms?
People are dipping their toes into it. Deadpool is an example of someone who's going to invest a little bit more heavily, but no, I wouldn't say it's a huge shift quite yet. I think the more brands that are going to implement TikTok Shop, they're going to see the results they want ASAP, and then they'll be ready. But brands that still haven't figured out what TikTok organic strategy will kind of struggle to make this part of it work.
Sounds like that's really an important piece. Do you find your clients already have that in place by the time they're with you, or sometimes they're hiring you guys as they're figuring out TikTok?
Yeah, a lot of brands who are coming to us are on this level of up-leveling, so to speak. And so they're changing a lot of agency and service providers. So I wouldn't say a lot of them have figured it out yet. I mean, another thing I should throw out there is like our average tenure of clients is 19 months. So a lot of them are exploring TikTok with us as platforms really evolved since they've come to work with our agency. But our newer clients, I think, are planning to do a lot on the organic side of the channel as their stack.
Cool. Love it. Nikki, is there anything else you want to flex on that you guys have done well or want to share that D2C marketers should try?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would probably be thinking about for the future of digital ads is really being agile and nimble in your testing strategy from a creative perspective. So anytime you're whipping out some new asset, like try to have an A/B version of it so that you can learn, but have your team be really precise on what the differentiator in each version is, because I think a lot of times people make assets that look and speak so differently that you can't pull out what's the actual winning component of it. So I would have a really solid A/B testing strategy.
Yeah, that's well put. Who is a good fit to reach out to you guys, and how can they find you to learn more?
Yeah, I think our sweet spot is helping brands crack their first million, and then brands usually stay with us until they're about like 30 million in size. So I would say anyone in
It's a good
there
journey.
is a good fit for us. The really big brands are likely going to go to are the bigger agency investors.
All right. Well, Nikki Lindgren, thank you so much for coming on share. I hope everybody checks you guys out at pennock.co, pennock.co. Anywhere else you'd want to send them, Nikki, or anything else you want to part with here?
Yeah, no, our website's a great place to link everybody to. So I appreciate it, Eagan.
All right. Yeah. Nikki, thank you so much for coming on and sharing what's working in e-commerce.
Awesome. Thank you.